A successful woman posts a joyful photo on social media, celebrating her dream job. 8 hours later, she's dead on her kitchen floor. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. The person who killed her had been secretly recording her conversations, tracking her every move with GPS devices, and practicing at a shooting range for weeks. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated revenge, executed with chilling precision by someone who believed love justified murder. What you're about to hear is the true story of how obsession, infidelity, and untreated mental illness collided in one of the most meticulously planned tragedies in recent memory. 3 lives destroyed, 1 fatal evening, and a trail of evidence so disturbing investigators couldn't believe what they uncovered. This is the story of Meredith Chapman's final day. The date was April 23, 2018. The location, Radnor Township, Pennsylvania, an affluent suburb where perfectly maintained lawns stretch before impressive houses, and violence seems impossible. As dusk settled over the community, 2 gunshots shattered the tranquility. A resident, alarmed by the unmistakable sound, hurried toward a brick residence on Lowry's Lane. Peering through the kitchen window, he witnessed a horrifying sight. A woman collapsed face down on the tile floor, her keys still gripped in her hand, as though she'd been struck down the instant she entered her home. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but when they stepped inside, they made a second devastating discovery. This wasn't a simple break-in gone wrong or a random act of violence. 2 people lay dead inside that house, and the story behind their deaths was far more twisted than anyone could have anticipated. At the heart of this tragedy was Meredith Chapman, a dynamic force of nature whose life seemed destined for greatness. Born January 31, 1985 in Newark, Delaware, Meredith possessed that rare combination of intelligence, charisma, and relentless drive that set her apart from an early age. Her ambitions weren't small, they were boundless. After completing her degree at the University of Delaware, she launched her career as a broadcast journalist, spending 2 years telling stories on camera and honing her communication skills. But Meredith wasn't content to remain in one role for long. She returned to her university, this time leading its marketing division while also teaching courses, mentoring students who looked up to her infectious enthusiasm. Politics called to her next. She took a position managing communications and external relations within the House of Representatives. By 32, she'd already mounted a campaign for Delaware State Senate. Though she didn't secure the seat, her effort earned widespread admiration and landed her on Delaware's coveted 40 under 40 list, a recognition of the state's most promising young leaders. On social platforms, Meredith's life appeared picture-perfect. Her feed overflowed with radiant smiles, adventure snapshots, and moments of pure joy. To anyone scrolling through, she seemed to have it all: the career trajectory, the public presence, the unstoppable momentum. In 2009, Meredith wed Luke Chapman, a local councilman whose political aspirations she actively championed. For several years, they seemed like a power couple, supportive, aligned, and building towards shared goals. But marriages, like people, evolve, and not always in the same direction. As 2017 approached, cracks began appearing in their foundation. The partnership that once thrived on common dreams and mutual respect started showing signs of strain. The affection dimmed, the connection weakened. By early 2017, both recognized that their 9-year marriage was fracturing beyond repair. It was during this vulnerable period that Meredith encountered someone who would irrevocably alter her destiny. His name was Mark Gerardo. Their paths crossed in a professional setting. Meredith was interviewing candidates for a creative director position at the university where she worked. Mark initially hesitated about pursuing the role. The age gap concerned him. Meredith was 15 years his junior. More complicated still, she would be his direct supervisor if he accepted the job. The professional boundaries were clear, but something sparked between them anyway. Meredith's sharp intellect and commanding confidence captivated Mark. He found himself drawn to her professionalism, mesmerized by her presence. When she casually suggested they meet for drinks one evening after work, he didn't think twice before agreeing. What began as a simple after-work drink evolved into hours of deep conversation. They talked, laughed, and shared intimacies they kept guarded from others. Mark opened up about profound losses, his parents, his brother, grief he rarely discussed with anyone. There was just one significant problem. Mark was married to Janine, his high school sweetheart from South Carolina. Despite this, Mark allowed himself to drift closer to Meredith. The attraction was powerful, undeniable. Soon, what started as professional interest transformed into something neither had planned, but both felt powerless to resist, a relationship that would set in motion a chain of events ending in unimaginable tragedy. As Mark began settling into his new Delaware life, living separately from Janine while she remained in South Carolina, two women found themselves loving the same man, completely unaware of how drastically their worlds were about to collide. When Janine finally relocated to join him in early 2018, she immediately sensed something had shifted. The man she'd known for decades felt different, emotionally unavailable, mentally elsewhere, his attention constantly drifting. Deep in her gut, she knew the truth before she could prove it. Another woman had entered the picture. Mark and Janine Girardeau seemed like opposites from the very beginning. Where Janine was assertive, vocal, and hungry for adventure, Mark preferred quietness, solitude, and staying out of the spotlight. Yet somehow, their contrasts complemented each other perfectly. From their earliest days together, an intense chemistry bound them. They fell hard and fast, absolutely certain they were meant to spend forever together. In October 1993, they made it official, exchanging vows and deciding their marriage would center on partnership rather than parenthood. They chose not to have children, instead dedicating themselves entirely to each other, traveling frequently, taking long hikes through nature, and doting on their beloved dogs. For many years, they seemed genuinely content. Like any couple, they had their disagreements, but they always managed to work through them and move forward together. But when a severe financial crisis hit, the stability they'd carefully built began crumbling. Both worked in marketing, yet as money became increasingly tight, their arguments grew more frequent and more intense. Janine, known for her forceful personality and need to have the final say in matters, clashed repeatedly with Mark's more passive nature. The situation deteriorated further when Janine lost her job and couldn't secure new employment. The setback devastated her emotionally, and she spiraled into a depression that left her feeling utterly hopeless and trapped in her circumstances. Years later, when the couple relocated from South Carolina to Delaware, the distance between them extended beyond just geography. Mark had already begun his new chapter professionally, accepting the creative director position at the University of Delaware. But when Janine arrived to join him in January 2018, she immediately noticed something fundamentally different about him. Mark seemed emotionally disconnected, preoccupied, like a stranger inhabiting their marriage. Suspicion took root quickly. Mark frequently mentioned his new supervisor, Meredith Chapman, describing her as ambitious, magnetic, and younger, someone many people admired. Though Janine directly confronted her husband, asking point blank if something inappropriate was happening between them, Mark firmly denied it. He insisted repeatedly it was nothing beyond a professional working relationship. On the surface, Janine appeared to accept his explanation, but internally, doubt consumed her completely. Unable to silence her instincts, she took extreme measures. She hired a surveillance company to monitor his phone activities, gaining unauthorized access to his text messages, call logs, and photographs. She even succeeded in recording private conversations between Mark and Meredith, finally confirming her worst suspicions were absolutely justified. On Valentine's Day 2018, Janine confronted Mark with the evidence she'd gathered. This time, he couldn't maintain the lie. He admitted everything. His growing connection with Meredith had evolved into genuine love. For Janine, this confession felt soul-crushing. She'd convinced herself Mark was simply experiencing a midlife crisis, perhaps seeking some temporary thrill or excitement. The devastating reality that he genuinely wanted a future with someone else shattered her completely. Mark suggested they attempt couples therapy, though his motivations differed drastically from hers. Janine desperately wanted to save their marriage, clinging to any possibility of reconciliation. Mark, however, was using the counseling sessions to confirm the relationship was truly over. By their third therapy appointment, he'd reached his final decision. He informed her that once his permanent Delaware residency was secured, scheduled for May, he would officially file for divorce. Meanwhile, Meredith was making significant changes in her own life. She ended her 9-year marriage to Councilman Luke Chapman. Their separation remained amicable and mutual. Both acknowledged their relationship had simply run its natural course. With that chapter closing behind her, Meredith looked forward with optimism toward a fresh beginning. When university administrators at the University of Delaware discovered Meredith Chapman's romantic involvement with her colleague Mark, both understood their time at that institution was coming to an end. Discreetly, they began exploring new career opportunities elsewhere. By April 2018, Meredith had secured an impressive position at Villanova University as Assistant Vice President for Marketing and Creative Services. Thrilled about this fresh start, she moved first, leasing a house in Radnor, Pennsylvania, a wealthy, peaceful suburb situated just outside Philadelphia. Mark intended to follow her shortly. Back in Delaware, Janine Girardo was falling apart. She had uprooted her entire existence to follow her husband northward, only to discover herself alone in an unfamiliar city, completely isolated from friends and family support systems. The betrayal cut impossibly deep. She'd lost her career, her sense of security, and now her marriage was dissolving. Yet, despite the overwhelming heartbreak, she desperately clung to hope that Mark might reconsider and return to her. She agreed to sign the divorce documents only under one specific condition: that he continue living with her and spending time together until May arrived. Walks together, shared dinners, forced moments of closeness. It was her desperate way of maintaining some connection, of not letting go completely. But suspicion still devoured her from within. She'd already exposed their affair by secretly monitoring his phone and recording their conversations without consent. When Mark discovered yet another listening device carefully hidden inside his jacket, his frustration reached its breaking point. The confrontation turned explosive, ending with shattered furniture and venomous words exchanged. Shaken and distraught, Janine threatened to take her own life. For the first time, Mark truly grasped how precarious her mental state had become. He strongly urged her to consult a psychiatrist, and she followed through. To him, this seemed like genuine progress, like she was finally beginning to accept their marriage was ending and starting to move forward. Then April 23, 2018, arrived, a day that would change everything forever. That morning, Meredith posted a photograph on Instagram, beaming proudly in front of Villanova University. Her caption radiated excitement about the new beginning she was so eager to embrace. That same evening, Mark had scheduled dinner with Janine to discuss the specifics of their divorce proceedings. He arrived at the restaurant first, settling in to wait. Then a message arrived from his wife. She was running behind schedule. Minutes ticked by before another text appeared. She wouldn't be coming to dinner after all, and instructed him to simply go home. What followed sent chills down his spine. A photograph illuminated Mark's phone screen. Garbage strewn across pavement. A used condom visible among the refuse. He instantly recognized the location. It was Meredith's trash from outside her new home. More messages flooded in rapidly. Janine wrote that he had completely destroyed her life and that she hoped he would never experience happiness again. The final message she sent was absolutely chilling, a simple goodbye. Panic seized him immediately. Mark rushed frantically toward Meredith's home, absolutely convinced his wife had gone there with dangerous intentions. Through a window, he witnessed a sight that would haunt him forever. Meredith lying motionless face down on the kitchen floor, blood visible on her leg. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. Stumbling inside in shock, he realized the absolute worst had already occurred. As he turned, his eyes fell upon another body sprawled across the living room floor, dressed entirely in black clothing. In that horrible, terrible moment, recognition hit him like a physical blow. It was Janine. Initially, investigators weren't certain what had transpired inside that house. With 2 deceased individuals and no weapon immediately visible, they considered whether a third party might have carried out the attack. But as officers carefully moved Janine's body, they discovered the gun beneath her. It had been discharged twice. What unfolded in that quiet Pennsylvania community was a devastating story of ambition colliding with betrayal, of love twisted into heartbreak, a triangular relationship that culminated in double tragedy. After the horrific discovery inside Meredith Chapman's Radnor residence, police brought Mark Gerardo to the station for extensive questioning. Visibly shaken and consumed by grief, he shared everything he knew with investigators. He handed over his phone willingly, showing them the disturbing sequence of messages Janine had sent, while he sat waiting at the restaurant. Messages that began with simple excuses about running late and escalated to a haunting final farewell. Step by step, detectives began piecing together the timeline of April 23, 2018, and what they uncovered was deeply troubling. Surveillance footage placed Janine in Radnor by early afternoon. At precisely 2:20 p.m., cameras captured her stopping at a gas station nearby. Later footage showed her parking a rented SUV close to Meredith's residence, a vehicle she had quietly reserved 10 days prior to the incident. From there, she rummaged through Meredith's garbage bins outside the home, and then slipped inside the house, concealing herself as she waited patiently for her husband's lover to return from work. Sometime between 5 and 6 o'clock that evening, Meredith arrived home from her first day at Villanova University, excited and optimistic about her new position. She never made it past her kitchen. Investigators believe Janine ambushed her the instant she stepped through the door, firing once before turning the weapon on herself. The text messages Janine had sent to Mark now read like a tragic final confession. Beyond the goodbye, she'd written that he had obliterated her life and wished him nothing but endless misery ahead. As detectives thoroughly searched the crime scene, additional disturbing details emerged. Inside the rental vehicle, they discovered binoculars, extra ammunition, latex gloves, and earplugs. Clear evidence that this attack had been meticulously planned, not impulsive. A neighbor later came forward, confirming she'd witnessed a woman working outside Meredith's property several days before the incident, observing the house through binoculars and watching Meredith's movements. The discoveries made inside the Gerardo's Delaware home painted an even more disturbing portrait of obsession. Hidden within the lining of Mark's jackets were miniature listening devices, each one carefully sewn into place by Janine's own hands. Police uncovered 12 notebooks completely filled with her handwritten transcripts of conversations she had secretly recorded over months. They also found a separate bank account used exclusively to purchase surveillance equipment, lock-picking tools, computer spyware, and GPS tracking devices she'd attached to both her husband's vehicle and Meredith's car. Tellingly, she had assigned nicknames to these tracking devices. The one monitoring Mark's car was labeled Lying Jerk, while Meredith's tracker bore a far more vicious and hateful name. Evidence showed that on March 20th, several weeks before the tragedy, Janine had purchased the firearm used in the attack. She practiced at a local shooting range on multiple occasions, including just hours before that fatal evening in Radnor. Among her personal belongings, Mark discovered a letter she had written in the weeks leading up to that devastating day. In it, Janine reflected deeply on her life as a wife and partner, admitting that she once discovered profound fulfillment in caring for her family and supporting her husband. But her words took an increasingly dark turn. She wrote that Mark and Meredith could not be permitted to get away with what they had done to her, that she was owed respect and dignity, and that she needed to seize control of the situation. The letter revealed a mind spiraling toward a tragic conclusion, justifying violence as a means of reclaiming power. Investigators later discovered that Janine had even reached out to neighbors for assistance. On the community app Nextdoor, she posted requests for recommendations, first asking for a divorce attorney and later seeking a marriage counselor. To the outside world and her online community, she appeared to be someone searching for a constructive way forward, trying to navigate her difficult situation. Her psychiatrist later confirmed that during their sessions, she displayed no alarming warning signs. She even spoke optimistically about starting fresh and potentially leaving Delaware behind for a new beginning elsewhere. Yet beneath this carefully constructed surface, she was living with profound emotional pain and had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, brought on directly by her husband's betrayal and the impending collapse of their marriage. By the conclusion of the investigation, one truth became absolutely undeniable. Janine's actions were not spontaneous or impulsive. They were calculated, meticulously planned, and tragically irreversible. For years, Janine had quietly battled depression, struggling in silence with her mental health. In the aftermath of this tragedy, a specialist who later examined her case suggested she may also have displayed characteristics of borderline personality disorder, a condition characterized by intense emotional turbulence and profound instability in relationships. To those who knew her, however, she seemed to be managing. Even Mark believed she was gradually coming to terms with the divorce. But underneath that facade, Janine's anguish and jealousy were festering, transforming into something far more sinister and dangerous. In the years following this tragedy, Mark has carried an enormous burden of guilt that weighs on him constantly. He admits he frequently questions whether Meredith would still be alive today had he made different choices, if he had ended his marriage sooner before becoming involved with someone else, or if he had truly recognized the severity of Janine's deteriorating mental condition. He says he has managed to find a way to forgive his wife for the personal pain she inflicted upon him. But what remains unforgivable in his mind is the deliberate choice she made to take an innocent woman's life, someone who had her entire future ahead of her, haunted by overwhelming grief and unable to remain in Delaware. Mark sold nearly everything he owned and eventually moved across the country to San Diego, where he secured employment with a luxury hotel chain. He also turned to writing as a form of healing, publishing a book detailing the case and launching a blog dedicated to raising public awareness about mental health issues, the devastating impact of betrayal in relationships, and the tragic consequences that can result from suffering in silence. His mission became helping others recognize warning signs that he himself had missed. The story of Meredith Chapman's murder has continued to reverberate far beyond the quiet streets of Radnor. Public opinion remains deeply divided. Some voices place blame squarely on Mark, pointing to his extramarital affair and questioning whether his choices set this entire tragedy into motion. Others criticize Meredith for entering into a relationship with a married man, arguing she bears some responsibility for the consequences. And many view Janine as simultaneously both perpetrator and victim, a tormented woman whose untreated mental health struggles spiraled catastrophically out of control, leading to an unthinkable act of violence. Yet beneath all the debates, opinions, and media headlines lies a heartbreaking and undeniable truth. Two women's lives were brutally cut short. Meredith was merely 33 years old, standing on the threshold of an exciting new chapter in her career and personal life. Janine was 47, ultimately destroyed by heartbreak, jealousy, and despair that consumed her completely. Their story has evolved into a cautionary tale about the dangerous intersections of love, betrayal, untreated mental illness, and the devastating ripple effects of choices made in isolation and silence. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about relationships, mental health, and responsibility. It reminds us that behind every headline about a crime of passion lies a complex web of human emotions, unaddressed pain, and missed opportunities for intervention. It demonstrates how quickly a life can unravel when mental health crises go unrecognized or untreated, and how betrayal, no matter how common, can trigger catastrophic consequences in someone already struggling with emotional instability. The tragedy also highlights the importance of recognizing warning signs in those we love. Janine's elaborate surveillance operation, her obsessive monitoring, her increasingly desperate attempts to control the situation, these were all red flags that, in hindsight, pointed towards someone in severe psychological distress. But in the moment, to those living through it, these signs can be rationalized, minimized, or missed entirely. What makes this case particularly haunting is the premeditation involved. This wasn't a moment of rage or a spontaneous act during a heated confrontation. Janine spent weeks, perhaps even months, planning every detail. She researched, she purchased equipment, she practiced with the weapon, she rented a vehicle in advance, she stalked her target. Each action was a conscious step toward violence. Yet somehow, she maintained enough composure to attend therapy sessions, post on community forums, and present herself as someone seeking help and working toward acceptance. This duality raises profound questions about the human psyche. How can someone simultaneously seek healing while plotting destruction? How does a person compartmentalize to such an extreme degree? Mental health professionals who have studied similar cases suggest that individuals experiencing severe emotional trauma combined with certain personality disorders can develop what's known as cognitive distortion, a warped perception, where violent actions become justified as necessary, even righteous responses to perceived injustice. In Janine's mind, as evidenced by her letter, she wasn't committing murder. She was taking back control, demanding respect, ensuring that Mark and Meredith couldn't get away with what they'd done to her. This distorted thinking transformed her from victim to vigilante in her own narrative, allowing her to rationalize the unthinkable. It's a chilling reminder that mental illness, particularly when combined with trauma and left untreated, can fundamentally alter someone's perception of right and wrong, of consequences and reality. Mark's decision to speak publicly about the tragedy, despite the criticism he faces, serves an important purpose. By sharing his story, including his own mistakes and failures, he's opened a difficult but necessary conversation about accountability, both personal and collective. He acknowledges his role in the chain of events. He admits the affair was wrong, that he should have handled his failing marriage differently, that he missed critical warning signs in his wife's behavior. But he also emphasizes that nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies taking another person's life. This distinction matters. We can acknowledge that Mark's choices contributed to Janine's pain without excusing her ultimate actions. We can recognize that Meredith entered into an ethically complicated relationship without believing she deserved to die for it. We can understand that Janine was suffering terribly without absolving her of responsibility for murder. Human beings and their relationships are complex, messy, and rarely fit into neat categories of pure victim or pure villain. The aftermath has also sparked important discussions about how we support people going through divorce, particularly when mental health issues are present. Janine did seek help. She saw a psychiatrist. She asked for recommendations for counselors and attorneys. But somehow, the system failed to identify just how dangerous her mental state had become. She was able to purchase a firearm despite her deteriorating condition. She attended therapy while simultaneously planning violence. The professionals she encountered saw someone coping with a difficult divorce, not someone on the verge of committing murder-suicide. This reveals critical gaps in our mental health infrastructure. How do we better identify individuals at risk of violence? What questions should therapists be asking? What warning signs should loved ones watch for? When does sadness become dangerous? When does heartbreak transform into homicidal ideation? These aren't easy questions and they don't have simple answers. But cases like this demonstrate why we must keep asking them. For Meredith's family and friends, the loss remains devastating and senseless. She was an accomplished professional, a beloved colleague, a promising leader who had so much left to contribute to the world. Her Instagram post that final morning, beaming with excitement about her new position, stands as a tragic timestamp, a moment of pure joy captured just hours before her life was stolen. Those who knew her described someone vibrant, kind, and full of potential. Her death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a loss to her community, her profession, and everyone whose lives she touched. The case also raises uncomfortable questions about infidelity and its consequences. While affairs are unfortunately common, and millions of people navigate them without violence, this tragedy demonstrates that we can never truly predict how betrayal will impact someone already struggling with mental health issues. Some people process heartbreak through therapy, support systems, and time. Others internalize the pain until it metastasizes into something far darker. The unpredictability is what makes situations involving infidelity and unstable mental health so potentially dangerous. There's also the matter of privacy versus safety. Janine's surveillance of Mark was illegal and invasive, a clear violation of his privacy and autonomy. Yet it was through this monitoring that she confirmed the affair, which some might argue she had a right to know about given her marriage. But where is the line? At what point does a spouse's right to know the truth collide with another person's right to privacy? And more critically, once that truth is uncovered through illegal means, what recourse exists that doesn't involve violence or destruction? These ethical gray areas make this case fascinating from a psychological and legal standpoint, even as the human cost remains heartbreaking. Janine broke laws when she planted listening devices, when she tracked vehicles without consent, when she monitored communications. But she was also a woman watching her marriage dissolve, desperate for answers. Does desperation excuse illegality? Of course not. But understanding the desperation helps us understand the progression toward tragedy. The surveillance evidence itself became crucial in the investigation, ironically. The very devices Janine used to spy on Mark and Meredith provided investigators with a detailed timeline of the affair, the deteriorating marriage, and Janine's increasingly unstable mindset. Her meticulous documentation, those 12 notebooks filled with transcribed conversations, painted a picture of obsession and paranoia spiraling out of control. Each page represented hours of her life consumed by jealousy and rage, time spent dwelling on betrayal rather than moving forward or seeking genuine help. What the notebooks also revealed was Janine's intelligence and attention to detail. She wasn't acting irrationally in the sense of being incoherent or disorganized. Quite the opposite. Her surveillance operation was sophisticated and methodical. This challenges common misconceptions about people in mental health crises. We often imagine someone losing their mind as chaotic and obviously unstable. But Janine demonstrated that a person can be deeply unwell while still functioning, planning, and executing complex tasks. This is what makes identifying dangerous individuals so challenging. The rental car she reserved 10 days in advance, the binoculars for surveillance, the earplugs to protect her hearing while shooting, the gloves to avoid leaving evidence. Every item suggested calculated planning. She wasn't swept away by sudden emotion. She made choices day after day that moved her closer to violence. At any point during those 10 days, she could have changed course. She could have told her therapist about her plans. She could have checked herself into a hospital. She could have simply left Delaware and never looked back. But she didn't. And that's the tragic reality of this case. Janine had options, resources, and opportunities to choose a different path. Mental illness and emotional pain can explain her actions without excusing them. They provide context for understanding how someone reaches such a dark place, but they don't erase her agency or absolve her of responsibility for the choice to kill. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect for people to reconcile: the coexistence of victimhood and perpetration. Janine was genuinely victimized by her husband's infidelity and by her own untreated mental illness. She suffered real trauma and real pain, but she also chose to respond to that pain by taking an innocent life and her own. Both things are true simultaneously, and our discomfort with that complexity doesn't make it any less real. Let me show you Section 8 clearly. Section 8 starts after. Both things are true simultaneously, and our discomfort with that complexity doesn't make it any less real. The legal system, had Janine survived, would have faced its own set of challenges in prosecuting this case. Defense attorneys would likely have argued diminished capacity due to mental illness, pointing to her PTSD diagnosis, her depression, and the possible borderline personality disorder. They might have painted a picture of a woman driven to temporary insanity by unbearable emotional anguish. Prosecutors, meanwhile, would have emphasized the premeditation, the planning, the deliberate acquisition of weapons and equipment. They would have argued that her ability to function normally in other areas of her life, attending therapy, posting online, maintaining appearances, demonstrated she understood right from wrong and could control her actions. This tension between mental illness and criminal responsibility plays out in courtrooms across the country. How unwell must someone be before we consider them not responsible for their actions? At what point does mental illness become an explanation rather than an excuse? These questions have no easy answers, which is why such cases often result in plea agreements rather than trials. Society struggles to balance compassion for the mentally ill with justice for victims and accountability for violent acts. What's particularly sobering about this case is how it might have been prevented. If Mark had been more honest earlier in his marriage, if he'd addressed his unhappiness before seeking comfort elsewhere, would things have ended differently? If Janine had been more forthcoming with her psychiatrist about her darkest thoughts, might intervention have been possible? If friends and family had recognized the severity of her decline, could they have done something? If gun purchase background checks included more comprehensive mental health screening, would she have obtained the weapon? These what-ifs haunt everyone touched by this tragedy, but they also serve a purpose. They remind us that prevention is possible, that intervention matters, that honest communication can save lives. They challenge us to be more aware of the people around us, to take mental health seriously, to recognize that heartbreak and betrayal, while common, can have catastrophic consequences when combined with untreated illness. The story also highlights the ripple effects of one violent act. Meredith's family lost a daughter, a sister, a beloved family member whose future was stolen. Luke Chapman, her ex-husband, lost someone he'd spent 9 years of his life with, even if their romantic relationship had ended. Her colleagues at Villanova lost a talented professional they'd just hired, excited to work with her. Her students and mentees lost a teacher and role model. Mark lost the woman he'd fallen in love with, and any chance at the future they'd planned together. And Mark himself became a different kind of victim, forever changed, forever guilty, forever questioning his own role in the tragedy. Even Janine's family and friends became casualties in their own way. They lost someone they loved to a combination of mental illness and her own choices. They must now live with the knowledge of what she did, the shame and confusion that comes with loving someone who committed such an act. They grieve not only her death, but also the destruction she caused and the person she became in her final weeks. For those studying criminal psychology, domestic violence, or mental health, this case offers critical lessons. It demonstrates that danger doesn't always look like what we expect. Janine wasn't verbally threatening Mark or Meredith directly. She wasn't engaging in obvious violent behavior. She was monitoring, watching, planning behaviors that might seem concerning, but don't typically trigger emergency interventions. It shows us that we need better tools for assessing risk, better training for mental health professionals, and better systems for identifying individuals who might harm themselves or others. The case also reinforces the importance of taking restraining orders and protection orders seriously. Had Mark or Meredith felt threatened enough to seek legal protection, would that have made a difference? Perhaps not. Determined individuals often violate such orders, but it might have added another layer of awareness, another opportunity for intervention. It's a reminder that when someone exhibits obsessive behavior, even if they haven't made explicit threats, the potential for violence exists and shouldn't be dismissed. As Mark continues his advocacy work, sharing his story despite the personal cost and public criticism, he carries a message that transcends this single tragedy. He speaks about the importance of honest communication in relationships, the necessity of addressing mental health proactively rather than reactively, and the devastating consequences of silence. His willingness to accept his share of responsibility while also holding Janine accountable for her actions provides a model for how we might discuss these complex cases more productively. The story of April 23, 2018 in Radnor, Pennsylvania, is ultimately a story about choices and their consequences, about love twisted into obsession, about pain transformed into violence. It's about two women who should still be alive today, one building her career and making a difference in higher education, the other, perhaps, finding peace and purpose after divorce. Instead, both are gone, victims of a perfect storm of infidelity, mental illness, and tragedy.